2024 Westlake Academy budget.
Hello? Hello? Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi. Thank you all for your time and attention today. I've got an update on the proposed budget for the last time for the Academy today. Remember that during regular session, we'll be holding a public hearing, and then there is a scheduled vote on adopting the budget for the fiscal year 24. All right. Again, this is just going to be kind of a quick update with some council feedback as far as how we're presenting some of the details to you today. But overall, the final proposed budget is $11.1 million for fiscal year 23-24. Within that, we do have 11.5 positions that are added to the dollars there. And that overall results in 116 FTEs proposed for fiscal year 24 within that $11.1 million. The $11.1 million is also an increase over the previous year of $1.2 million, with the bulk of that being those added positions. Something that is not changing for fiscal year 24 is the proposed enrollment. So we are looking at keeping that flat at 875 students next year. And then going through kind of the numbers from here on out, what we're going to talk about are those revenues and expenditures. We'll go quickly through the revenues. There's no changes to that from what you've seen previously, with the exception of the town revenues. Given the input we got last week, we did come back and make a slight adjustment to the overall operating expenditures, and therefore we upped the transfer from the town just slightly to cover those positions that we discussed. But other than that, the state revenues and the local revenues are flat from what we've presented all summer. And just a reminder that within the revenues, we do have the $1.25 million from the foundation projected, and that if that target for whatever reason isn't captured, then the town will step in and make them whole. And then the other thing that is huge for the Academy is going to be those TEA revenues. That makes up the vast majority of our revenues. Their allotment for the upcoming fiscal year of $6160 is unchanged over prior year. All right, and then this is just a different way to look at it whenever we're talking about numbers. Not everybody likes spreadsheets and bullet points, so here you can see that all of the state revenues, which include all of the TEA revenues, make up about 72% of the overall revenue budget for next year. All right, and then switching over to expenditures, we've got $9 million budgeted for personnel. That includes, as I said, 116 FTEs. It's about $1 million increase over the previous year. I think everybody understands salary and benefits, and a lot of the conversation we've had over the last few weeks has been around the $2.1 million in the operating expenditures and making sure we have details and we understand what's in that.
And
yes,
does this figure that excludes the shared services that gets a portion from the town?
Correct.
Yeah.
Shared services are completely presented within the town's budget. And then this visual here is what everybody has been used to seeing. These are the TEA designated categories. So outside of the personnel, whenever we're talking about our normal 5-year forecast and budget, the categories that we use there are contracted services, supplies and materials, other operating costs, and then debt service. Just a note here, even though it's called debt service, it's actually our annual lease payment for the iPads. Again, this is TEA driven on how we classify some of our expenditures. And the feedback we'd gotten over the past few weeks had to do with not really understanding kind of the finer points of TEA versus our reality here in Westlake. So what we've done is within that 2.1, we tweaked the meaning of them just a little bit and then made sure that we've got some slightly different classifications that make more sense to us and our operations. And so what you'll hear about today in all of the functions are going to be contracted services, supplies and materials, IT and software, travel, training, and then other expenditures. So the 2.1, regardless of our new look at it versus what we're used to seeing with the TEA categories, that number stays the same. It just shifts a little between those different categories. And so whenever we're talking about the categories, first we'll start with contracted services just because it's the same name as what TEA presents. However, for us, whenever we're talking about it, we're specifically talking about services that are provided by a third party. In some cases, we do have agreements or contracts with them, but generally speaking, these are those things that we can't do in-house for whatever reason. It could be behavioral specialists, it could be electricity. So you're going to see a lot of stuff like that. And as I said, I'll kind of go through some of those big rocks as we're going through all of the different functions. Whenever it comes to supplies and materials, those are consumables. Those are the things that we're handing out. They're the football equipment. They're the construction paper in the art class. It's all the stuff that we just have to buy in order for the school to operate normally. Whenever we're talking about IT and software, this could be hardware, this could be software. There are a couple just caveats to the IT. Again, shared services is excluded from this budget. So these are all the things that are actually happening over at campus and only at campus. So they have servers on site. They have a lot of forward-facing applications that the teachers and the students use, in addition to some of those higher-level things like their ERP system and their time and attendance. And then whenever we're talking about travel and training for the purposes of our operating budget, what we're talking about is the actual employee travel and training. If you think about over the last year, we had students that had the opportunity to go to South Africa and to Costa Rica. A lot of that type of travel has to do with fundraising, and so that won't be captured in the operating budget. If it's a normal tournament where they might for graduation next year, then within this, because this is also the largest portion of any of the different functions, these are where all of our teachers are. So this is, whenever we say instructional, we mean in the classroom and things that are actually happening, which is why you have that huge FTE count there. And then the other things that you'll see here, again, have to do with that interaction with the students from the teachers. So we have $25,000 in specialists. So those are going to be our speech pathologists and OTs and PTs. So again, those third-party services that we don't have on staff. Whenever we're talking about IT, here specifically, we're talking almost $40,000 for iReady. So that was something that we talked about in our June workshops. It's just a way to assess math skills, and it's replacing something else. And then the other thing that you'll see in here has to do with the other category. We've got $10,000 in here for IBO. So we are an IB school, which means that we have to join a membership in order to program the things that we do here. And so that is included in the instructional category. Do we have any questions on this function? Okay. All right, going over to resources and media. Whenever we're talking about resources and media, we're saying library. So the people that are here are the librarians. All of their supplies and materials and all of their IT has to do with actual physical books that they're purchasing or an online database where we are getting ebooks. And whenever we're talking about the other operating expenses here, we're talking about snacks. So you're going to see some of these small dollars throughout the different functions. If you have questions, let me know. Anything here for the library? Oh, home viewers? I sure can. Is this? All right, okay. All right, switching over to the curriculum and staff training. We don't have any full-time personnel budgeted here. This has to do with all of the specific programming that we happen to have, and most of it has to do with making sure that all of our teachers are in compliance, all of our admin are in compliance for what it is we're training on. So within here, we've got the majority of it dedicated to travel and training, and we've got it broken down between the high school, the middle school, and the elementary school. $17,000 for the high school, 12,500 for the middle school, and then just over 20,000 for the elementary school. Again, these are going to be those things that all the teachers have to participate in. There's a fair amount of required compliance training that has to happen every year, in addition to the specific training that has to happen so that we're providing the classes in line with the IB curriculum. For this specifically, just to give council an update, we had met with the principals last week at the end of the week to talk about the need for an actual line item listing, and so they're working on that, and as soon as we've got it completely ready, we'll share that with council. Any questions on curriculum and staff training? Okay. All right, switching over to the instructional leadership. This is a little less than $300,000 for their total budget. There's really nothing super fun here. There's 4 people that are considered part of the instructional leadership, and then most of this has to do with the middle school training. The only other thing that is a little different here is what's called TIBS, so TIBS, so Texas IB Schools. This is another membership that we join because we're an IB school. Any questions on instructional leadership? Okay. Switching over to school leadership, so these are going to be mostly our principals and the admin staff. 1.3 million here. The big rock, whenever we're talking about the contract services in this particular budget, is for the PEIMS consultant. So as you're aware, we have a significant amount of compliance reporting that we have to do to the state in order to keep our funding. We also have different reports that we have to share with IB. And so here we've got about $34,000 that we've programmed for the PEIMS consultant. There's also an additional cost whenever it comes to the IT side of things, where we use a specific vendor, ESC, in order to pull a lot of our reports that have to do with the PEIMS requirements on not the student side, but on the employee and enrollment side. And then lastly here, what they've done within this particular cost center is they've limited their travel and training to $3,000 per employee that's budgeted in here. Any questions so far? Okay, switching over to the guidance and counseling, we've got almost $600,000 programmed here, and this is for 7 FTEs throughout the campus. The majority of it here is going to be in that contract services, and that has to do with all of those outside behavioral specialists. So again, the speech pathologists, the occupational therapists, the audiologists, all those fun people that we have to bring in. And then whenever we're talking about the travel and training, even though there's 7 employees here, only 4 of them have required training that's budgeted here. All right, switching over to health services. There's only 1 FTE here. I did want to make a comment that we have a nurse on campus, and then we also have an EMT that is provided from the fire department. The EMT is budgeted in the town's budget, so you won't see the costs of her in this personnel cost. And then all of the snacks and overhead have to do with the running of the actual school nurse's office. So they're going to be the snack-heavy group. Any questions there? Okay. All right, and then switching over to athletics. Here we've only got 1 FTE fully budgeted. The rest of that personnel cost has to do with stipends. Our athletic director is actually budgeted in Function 23, which is our administrative function. And then most of the coaches, because the majority of them are teachers as well, their base salary is coming out of that instructional function that we talked about at the beginning. And then whenever we're talking about their specific contract services, a lot of this has to do with the referees, umpires at the actual games that everybody attends. And then whenever we're talking about the supplies and maintenance, the biggest cost right now is going to be that $16,000 for lighting. That's currently being worked on as far as getting a quote and seeing if there's any opportunity for a match from the community or a business. So if that changes, we'll come back and we'll change that budget.
And then additional security for the games, where does that come out of?
That's going to be in the security function, and we'll get to that a little later. Yes, sir. And then all of the other supplies and maintenance has to do with the actual athletic equipment. So again, those football helmets, megaphones, pom-poms, all that stuff. Any questions on athletics? Okay. All right. Whenever we talk about other activities, we're specifically talking about all the other clubs on campus, all the different extracurriculars. So there is a little bit of a difference in how they're spending their money. One of the things that they do have budgeted here is about $20,000 for chartered vehicles, just because we've got a finite number of vehicles over at the campus. There might be some conflicting times where students have places to be. So we make sure that we have dollars budgeted so that they can get to where they need to be. And then the rest of the contracted services has to do with the maintenance of those vehicles. Any questions on that? Okay, getting over into administrative. So we've got 2 FTEs here. In here, you'll see a pretty large number for the contracted services. A lot of that has to do with legal services. We've got a little over $40,000 budgeted for that. We've got $18,000 budgeted for our auditor. We have $31,000 budgeted for an interlocal agreement with ESC. This is also where we put recruiting costs. This is where we have our ERP or our financial systems annual operating costs. This is also where we'll see the time and attendance software being budgeted, and then website hosting. So whenever we're talking about administrative, not only are we talking about admins, but we're kind of talking about the overall campus overhead, so things that kind of affect everyone. And then whenever we're talking about the other on here, we specifically have a $30,000 expense for an umbrella policy, just because we might need that. Are there any other questions on administrative? Okay. And now for maintenance and operations, everybody's been over to the campus and it's beautiful and there's lots of square footage over there, which means there's a lot of upkeep that has to happen. So this $1 million budget includes almost $150,000 for janitorial services, about $76,000 for landscaping, $35,000 for HVAC services, $26,000 to make sure that the fire sprinklers are being maintained over there. And then on top of that, we've got another $66,000 in specialty supports. That would be our electricians, our plumbers, again, those things that we don't have somebody on staff that can provide those services. Also within that contracted services budget, we've got almost $250,000 programmed for our utility costs. So natural gas, water, all of our electricity. That's where those dollars are budgeted. And then whenever we're talking about supplies and maintenance, the majority of the supplies here have to do with normal cleaning supplies. Any questions on maintenance and operations? Before we move on, I do want to make kind of a differentiation. So this is basically the facilities budget for the campus. If we're doing any major improvements that extend the life of an asset, you would see those in the town's budget. These are just for operating and maintaining our current infrastructure.
And then, do we have an obligation to go out and bid on a regular basis for these services?
Yes, we do.
Okay. How often do we have to do that?
So for the utilities, it's prescribed. Whenever we have to do it, we sign a 5 to 10 year contract for those different amounts, and then we go back out to bid. For the rest of them, generally speaking, 3 years is a good rule of thumb, but if we start seeing, like we have in previous years with costs rising, you can always rebid. Okay, and so security and monitoring, this is where we've got all that extra security that we talked about for the different games. All in all, for next year, we're looking at about $48,000 for those expenses. Then whenever we're talking about the supplies and security services, that includes our antivirus service. We've got a required training called Know Before. It's required by the state. It's about making sure that people who are on our computers are trying to be safe with what they're doing. We've also got dollars programmed for School Dude, which is our online ticketing software, and then Office 365. Do we have any questions about security, data? Okay. Moving over to community services, This function is just to capture the reimbursement for the 1.5 staff from the Academy Foundation. Just remember, we budget for them and we pay them out of the school's budget because they're TRS employees, but the town does a transfer to reimburse the school for those costs. And then the last function on here is debt service. And again, it's kind of a misnomer just because it's not really debt in the traditional sense, but it is an obligation to pay over multiple years in a lease format. So this is where we pay for our iPads that all the students have, and this is year 2 of 3 out of that contract. Okay. And do we have any final questions or comments before we move on to all of the formal parts of adopting the budget?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Casey, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
All right, moving on to items of community interest. Mr. Sasser, come on down.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Summer is basically pretty much over for us already, despite the heat. So we're getting right into a heck of a lot of events coming up, both on the municipal and on the academic side. So let's jump right into it. Starting off with this Wednesday, August 9th at 11 a.m. is the Chamber of Commerce luncheon. I've got a couple of RSVPs from you guys at the Texas Motor Speedway, so that should be a lot of fun. That'll be the first one post-summer that they're going to be hosting. On August 15th next week, that's a Tuesday, the Board of Trustees breakfast at Westlake Academy. This is always a big event where members of the board, mayor, and so forth are invited to a breakfast at 8 a.m. at the MPH where we celebrate the staff as they get ready to start the new year. And of course, it's always exciting for the BOT gifts as well. I think everybody, the staff here in attendance and watching at home are going to enjoy those. It's a kind of a special nod to the 20th anniversary. Planning and zoning meeting, next one, August 15th. Westlake Academy first day of school is Thursday, August 17th. Other new dates of note, Carroll ISD is on the 15th, their first day of school. Keller ISD and Northwest ISD are both on August 16th. Military Heroes Run is coming up on Saturday, August 19th. That's at 7 a.m. That's a lot of fun. It's a tremendous honor to have those guys once again have their Heroes Run in Westlake. That's going to kick off at 1300 Solana Boulevard, right across the street over at the plaza. That is at 7 a.m. The town hall and court will be closed on Labor Day for